Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Amanda Show. And on today's episode, I have an amazing guest, Mr. S.L. Kanthan from India. So today we are going to discuss the multipolar world. But as we go into it, Mr. S.L. Kanthan, please could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm based out of India, and I worked for decades in the technology world. And then I got interested in geopolitics because whatever that happens in our lives, it's actually shaped by what's going on around the world. And people don't realize that the salaries that they make, the jobs that they have, the economy that they have in their country, the price they pay for food, the type of the education that they have, what they read in the media, when they go to the hospital, what sort of medicines they get. Everything is actually influenced by geopolitics. And it's some guy sitting in Washington, D.C. will have like an impact on your life in Nigeria. It's really
Mhm.
shocking. But that's what I've been learning on my own for the last decade or so, and it's been a really fun journey.
Okay, you're completely right. The reason why I started this show back in 2024 is because I realized that even if you say you don't care about what's going on in the world, what is happening in the world, particularly on an international level, affects you in your tiny village somewhere in Africa, right? And so I noticed that the world was changing. That era of, say, the unipolar world, where the United States could call the shots all over the place. I noticed that that world order was breaking apart. So I wanted to awaken Africans to know this is what is going on. And that's why I started this show. So it's really apt for you to mention that everything, what you pay for in your country, your inflation, the hospitals you visit, everything is tied to geopolitics. And there's no better person to discuss this today than with you. So, sir, can you tell us where people can find you so that I can leave that in the links in the description so that people can follow you?
Yeah, so I write on Substack. I'm very active on I mean social media like Twitter. I have a YouTube channel. And then I also write for the Russian media, Chinese media, German media. So you can just search my name, and I'm sure that you'll find the articles.
All right, so let's get into the conversations. Please, I'll be taking notes. You may notice that I might be writing something. I'm taking note because you're really knowledgeable in this field. So just bear with me. So let's begin. The first question that I want to ask you is the most common one is what is the multipolar world?
Yeah. So the multipolar world, in summary, it means that the power is going to be distributed all across the world into many different regions. So this power could be, the economic power, technological power, military power, soft power, diplomatic power, and so on. So we are so used to, like, I believe if a person is of your age or even my age, we're so used to the U.S. being the leader, and we are used to looking up to the West. If somebody wants a really good job, they want to make a lot of money. The first thought is, okay, so I'm going to go to London, I'm going to go to the U.S., I'm going to go to Germany, whatever, right? And if you're going to watch the movies, you're going to watch the Hollywood movies.
Mhm,
If
yeah.
you're going to to read news, you're going to read the New York Times to figure out what's happening in the world. If you want to search, you use the Google, a
Yeah.
search engine, from the US. And if we want to talk to somebody on video, we use the Google Meet or Zoom.
Also, yeah.
So you can see that the US has an enormous, enormous power around the world. But that's, that was sort of, the unipolar world we've been living in since the demise of the Soviet Union. And well, even during the Cold War, I would say that the US had maybe 70% of the power, maybe the Soviet Union was 30%. So that was a bipolar world, but it was more tilted towards the US. And then if we go before World War II, that was sort of a multipolar world, right? So you had all these, the European, uh, uh, I mean, the empires, the colonialists.
Mm.
So the British were the leading, but you had the French, the Belgians, the Germans, so like they had uh, some influence around the world. And then if you go back, like the last 500 years, the world has been fully dominated by the Europeans.
Mm.
You had the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, uh, the Dutch Empire. They were the first ones to like really travel around the world and to colonize places. So, but each of those, the empires, they lasted for about 100 to 200 years at the most, and then the funny thing is that they all follow the same path,
Yeah.
you know. So it's sort of like watching like the drug dealer. He starts small, he becomes big, and then he
Yeah.
becomes too self-confident, and he lacks the discipline. So you watch like the Hollywood movies like Scarface,
Mm.
right? So Scarface is like the empires, and they all do the same mistake. They get into too many wars, they get into too much debt, and they become lazy. The people don't want to work hard, and they start to burn bridges. And then the rich become very, very rich in those empires. And then they start to ignore the masses, So, for example, if you look at Britain in the 19th century, so you had the novelists like Charles Dickens, who wrote about the poverty in London and in other places, which is very shocking because the British were uh, pillaging the whole world.
Mm.
They were stealing from the African countries. They were stealing from India. They were stealing from China and the Asian countries. So you would think that Britain would have been so rich and all the people would have been so wealthy. But then you read Charles Dickens and you see so much
Poverty.
poverty in Britain. So the funny thing is the same thing is now happening to the US empire, right? It's like the same path.
Mm.
Too much debt. It's something like $36 trillion. So many zeros we cannot even put our mind to it. And it's basically the top 5% of Americans who are doing very, very well. And then if you look at like maybe the 10% are doing very reasonably well. But 50% of Americans are broke.
Mhm.
They live from paycheck to paycheck. They're really suffering. There's a lot of poverty. I mean, the homelessness. When you look at the infrastructure in the US, like simple things like roads, bridges, airports, and they all look so sad. you know
Yeah, yeah,
like if you go to the New York airport, Los Angeles airport, I think probably like maybe like, I mean, the Nigerian airport probably looks better in Nairobi, right? Oh,
yeah.
sorry, that's in
Compared to a country that's
Kenya.
as rich
Yeah,
as United States, you expect more.
yeah. So that's kind of sad. And then they're now losing in technology to China. They cannot even win the war against Russia. So Russia's economy is like with two, I mean, with $2-3 trillion or something like that. Very very small. But they were able to defeat the U.S. and the Europeans, but combined, NATO couldn't do anything. So we see the fall of the U.S. empire, and now, so if you look at the last 500 years, one empire like always replaced another. Like the Spanish were replaced by the Dutch, and then the Portuguese, the French, the British, and so on. But now we are going to go into a multipolar world where there's not going to be one boss, and that is the good thing. But
Mm,
then the bad thing is also that we don't have a policeman, so we all have to behave one another uh,
mm,
with one another. So because if just say one country starts war with another country, what do we do? Like in South Sudan, uh, Congo, there are now like a lot of the internal
conflict.
displacements, right? So we don't even know who's responsible. Like we don't have a lot of the information, and we don't have like a judge, to go and say, "Hey, Congo, hey, Eritrea, hey, South Sudan, Sudan."
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no like one person uh, that the world will listen to. So that's the negative side of the multipolar world. But the positive things are like a lot more, you know. So whether you look at the African countries or, I mean, the Asian countries, this could be the century of the global South, right? So like
Mm,
this could be the century. uh, I mean, when Africa really takes off, like China did 40 years ago. So the next 40 years, it could be the golden opportunity for Africa, which is full of really young people, right? So they could be working, they could be spending, they could be doing, I mean, innovations, startups, businesses. So there's great potential, uh, but it also means you need uh, to plan carefully, and we need to work hard. So the young people are not just going to bars every Friday and having
see,
lots of drinks. So they should be like very disciplined. So there are these wonderful opportunities and wonderful challenges.
okay, amazing. So now we've touched on that. I just wanted to ask, right now, like you mentioned, the multipolar world is right in the conversation. If you listen to the news, initially the conversation of the multipolar world seemed to be coming from just alternative media or non-Western media. But now we are beginning to see it trickle into the Western media. Everyone is discussing the multipolar world. But when would you say that the multipolar world began to take shape? When is
Mm.
that moment when we can look back and say this is when it began?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's no simple answer. because it's like sort of like asking, when did you become old? You know, so maybe when you had the first the gray hair at the age of 35 might be the beginning of somebody getting to be old. But I would say that the point when people woke up to the fact that the US empire is a big Ponzi scheme that was kind of fooling the world was the 2008 financial crisis, you know, because people just thought, oh, the Americans are so smart. They have the capitalism, they have Wall Street, because the US is very good at spinning stories, right? So that's their biggest power. And that's something that we all should learn, you know? So, like, if
Mm,
you are a Nigerian politician or a think tank person, then you should be thinking about what is the story of Nigeria, right?
okay.
So same for India, same for China. So we all need to think of our story, the narrative that builds on the past and gives a good vision of the future.
Mm,
Because if you are uh, I mean, but excited about the future, then that really gives you the motivation. You know, like if you wake up in the morning and you have a fantastic plan for the rest of the day, then you're going to jump out of the bed very happily.
mm-hmm,
You know,
mm-hmm,
so the same thing works for nations. So we need to figure out our future, the narrative of our future, and that really motivates the students. I mean, the people,
people,
and
yeah.
that's something the U.S. has done very well. You know, so in 1944, 1 year before the end of World War II, the Time magazine guy, so he was the founder of the Life magazine and the Time magazine, and he wrote an article called "The American Century." So we have to give him the credit that he had the vision. You know, I mean, like even before the war was over, he said, "Hey guys, we, the USA, are going to be the leader in this century, and this is what we should do, and this is who we are." You know,
Mm.
I mean, like there's a lot of
I'm
propaganda, but
sorry, yeah, sorry for cutting you short, but what you just mentioned now has been something I've mentioned several times on this show, is that we as Africans, we need to decide what does it mean to be African. Because once we can settle on that identity, I think Africa is the place, sorry for cutting you short, but Africa seems to be the place where we are most unsure of who we are. So we are picking up an accent, maybe a British accent, or we are trying to do this like the Chinese or like the Russians. We are trying to be everybody else but Africans. So it's been a question that has been on my mind. And now that you mentioned this, I just realized that you cannot you cannot break free. You cannot break out to become a truly great nation until or continent until you decide what it means to be African. And so now you said this guy back then in the 1940s had already started talking about the new American century, right? So it's really apt. So please continue. It just came to my mind now. Please continue.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's so sad that like there's not a lot of say the link between the African countries. Like, even if you take like physical links, right? That's the basics, that you have to start with. So you need roads and railways and I mean, the airports and seaports that link all the African nations, and that's the beginning. And then you need to have people-to-people exchanges, with tourism. So young people from Nigeria are going to South Africa to study. People in Zambia are going to Kenya. People from Chad are traveling to Tanzania, and so on and so forth. So you need uh, the physical infrastructure, you need the soft interactions, and you need the smart people from each of the African nations. They should get together to figure out the common destiny. Because there are like a lot of the countries in Africa where the population is not that big, right? I mean, so Nigeria is the largest nation in Africa, right, in terms of
Yes,
population.
population. Yes.
Yeah. So, but then there are like a lot of the countries that may have like 30 million, 40 million people, which is not that large.
Yeah.
So then they would need to work with you to figure out, so how to work on major projects and things like that. Because somebody may have this, like say, the mind, and then, but they don't have, the investment to
Mm.
go to buy the machines to dig the mine. And then when they do that, they realize that, oh, so now we don't have the railways to transfer the tin,
Yes.
coal,
Yeah.
whatever. And then you need a seaport, and then you need to buy ships, right? So there are like a lot of things. And then you need to have smart people, smart young people who become the engineers and so on to operate that. But in order to do that, you need to build schools and colleges, and then to build the colleges, you need professors. So, like, all these the, the logistics. There are like, 500 things you have to do to make a nation successful. So it's not going to be like "Make Africa Great Again," a slogan, and then you go, "Yay, we did it!"
We have to have
So
actionable steps.
yeah, yeah. So you need to like, bring in 100 really smart people from all over Africa, and then one group works on technology, one group works on the infrastructure, one group works on media, one group works on schools, blah blah blah. So there are so many things you have to do. But once you get started, it's not that hard, because this has been done before. And there's a lot, for my country, because in my country, India, there's also a lot of poverty. So we have 1.5 billion people in India, but 1 billion are still very poor. They may not have proper access to the electricity, the internet, schools. They don't have really good jobs. So there are a lot of problems, very similar. We share the same sort of problems with Africa. So, but we can learn from the past, right? So we don't have to
Mm.
reinvent the wheel. Like if you have to know how to build, so you don't have to think, oh, what should I do to build a college? That has been done many times
Yes.
before, right? So then you can say, okay, so we're going to build one university for science and engineering, one university for social and social science and politics, and one university for business, and so on and so forth. So the planning is not hard. and then the execution needs to happen. And then the big thing is that all the African countries, they need to know that they can succeed only if they work together.
Mhm.
Because the power of 1 billion is a lot more than the power of, say,
Individual
100
countries.
million, right?
Yeah.
So, because when you work together, then but 2 plus 2 is not just 4, it becomes like 7, 8, like there is
Mm.
the
Multiplication.
multiplying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's back to the 2008 financial crisis and when the world began to notice that, we're in a multipolar world and the United States is just not what we thought it was.
Yeah. So that was really shocking, because it was like, oh my God, the US is actually bankrupt. And they had
Mm.
to go to China to beg for money. Can you believe that? That the US Treasury Secretary went to China. He's like, we need you to spend like $200 billion buying our treasuries. Um, so they were, and then they started to print money. So from 2009, the US economy is totally fake. Okay, so they've been like
Oh,
surviving by just printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, right? So, like,
okay.
if so I just imagine if but Nigeria could, print trillions of dollars that are going to be accepted all over the world. Then
We
you
can
would
just be
be,
the richest. We can
yeah,
be the
then you'd be
richest
like,
country in the world. Yeah.
yeah, okay, so you'd be
Yeah.
like a beautiful nation. Okay, so
Yes, that's
Nigeria
true.
would have like amazing roads, bullet trains, and people living in mansions everywhere, and you have, so why cannot the rest of the world do that, right?
Yeah.
So the whole financial system is totally rigged, right? So if people like in India, we need uh, some money that is going to be accepted worldwide. We have to work for say, the Apple, and Apple will pay an Indian $1 an hour, and he has to work like 10 hours a day to put together the iPhones that get sold for $1,400. But the Indian guys have to work for $1 an hour, because or else we don't have access to dollars. We cannot
Dollars.
buy, raw materials from the world. So we need to buy, uh, I mean, uh, oil, gas from around the world. And so nobody is going, so nobody really wants to accept the Indian currency. So they all would want the dollar. So then we are at the mercy of the US, So we go to the US and we say, hey, what can we do for you to earn some dollars? And then the US has then the advantage in the leverage, right? So the same thing they do to the African nations, right? So they come to Africa and they go, hey, why don't you ask your children to work in the cocoa farms, right? The cocoa plants. And then the African children have to work in the cocoa farms to make, to do the farming of the cocoa nuts. And then they get sent to, say, Switzerland, to France, and they make chocolate out of it. And then they sell it at 100 times the price, right? So the farmer in Africa may get a $1 for the coffee or the cocoa bean, and
Mhm.
then Starbucks will make $50 out of that $1, right? So like there's a huge, the arbitrage that is very, very unfair. right? So we need to break out of that. I mean, uh, it's like a financial chain around our legs and
Mm.
our necks. So it's like, very, very unfair. Uh, so we need to work on how to move up the value chain. I mean, why should the world be buying, say, Swiss chocolates? Why can't we buy? I mean, the Ethiopian chocolates.
Yeah.
you know, I mean, making a chocolate is not rocket science. We all should be able to figure out. And then you look at like, you look at the potential of the global South. It's really huge. But we've been brainwashed into accepting the superiority of the American empire, the Western empires, and there's no need for that. And now, so I think you mentioned in your, email that how China, um, it made a big difference in the
Yeah.
multipolar world, and that's true, because without China, there's really nobody else to challenge the U.S.
Mm.
And now China is challenging the U.S. across so many spectrum. And then we have the BRICS nations, right? And so I hope that really takes off,
Mm.
because the BRICS is a wonderful, wonderful concept, and it's based on partnership and the equality. There's not going to be one boss in BRICS. It is very democratic, and I hope that Nigeria and all the other the big nations in Africa are going to become a part of BRICS. And then,
Currently, member, like it's a partner country, but it's not a full member yet.
okay,
It's here.
yeah, because then we all can trade in the local the currencies, because it is the dollar that is the foundation of all the power of the U.S.
Yes.
Once you take away the dollar, the U.S. is going to be at the pretty much at the same level as the rest of the nations.
Okay. So let's move to another important topic when it comes to the multipolar world. In your opinion, what role do you think that the Ukraine conflict played in accelerating this whole multipolar world?
Yeah, so that was huge. The Ukraine war is probably the biggest mistake that the U.S. did in a long time. The first the big mistake that the U.S. did was to start the Middle East wars. When they started to bomb Iraq, Afghanistan, but they sort of managed it. They wasted $6 trillion, but they were able to save their face. Uh, but then the Ukraine of a conflict had, really one purpose, was to bring down Russia, and thereby to stop the rise of the multipolar world. Because from the US point of view, there are only two big challengers left in the world. One is Russia, one is China. So they were like, so they looked at these two and they go, let's start with Russia. It's a smaller power, smaller economy, and we can easily bring it down with sanctions. So they stole $400 billion of foreign exchange of Russia in just one day. Like one day, Putin wakes up, and he had worked very, very hard. Like he's a great leader. So
Mm.
the U.S. Destroyed Russia in the 1990s. So when Putin became the leader on January 1st, 2000, Russia was in a very, very bad shape. And he worked very hard to turn Russia around. Oh, by the way, that will be a very good thing for the African nations to study. You know how Putin took Russia from a very, very bad situation to once again a powerful nation.
That's a conversation I want to have with someone because Russia, for me, is everything that could go wrong in a nation, right, was happening in Russia. So how Putin could bring Russia from where it was literally it was on its knees or was on the floor, wasn't even on its knees. But Putin could do that in a time frame of a few decades to now it's coming back as a world power. Everyone thought Russia was forgotten, but it's not forgotten. So it's something that I look at and I say, if Russia can do this in just a few decades under Vladimir Putin, why can't we replicate that in Africa? So you're very correct to say it's something that I want to discuss with someone so that we can have actionable plans from that meeting so that we can replicate in Africa. So please continue what you were
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, but like you said, if you had looked at Russia in 1999, it was in a terrible shape. You know, the GDP had fallen by 40%. Suicide rates were skyrocketing. Poverty everywhere. They could not even pay the soldiers, and they didn't have the oil and gas for the tanks and the fighter jets. You know, can you imagine Russia
Country
with
that has
yeah,
it's
so
a
much
country that country
oil,
that has oil. Yes. Oh my God.
and they didn't have wheat, and they had, I mean, import wheat. It was just a very, very sad. You know, like you said, Russia was on the floor, and how he did it. So that should give the rest of us the hope, right? So then
Mm.
we can say, hey, so we can turn around Africa in 2 decades, right? So yeah, so
Ukraine
where was I?
conflict. You're talking about how the Ukraine conflict accelerated
Yeah,
the multiple.
thanks. So, you know, so they thought, okay, you know, so we can bring down Russia, and then we will put like a puppet. I mean, the American puppet in Russia, like we did in the 1990s. You know, so in the 1990s, Russia was fully controlled by the U.S. The U.S. They controlled the Russian parliament. The Russian president Yeltsin was like an alcoholic and he was stupid, but the U.S. Surrounded him with, the traitors, you know, who were all basically working for the U.S. So they thought they could do the same thing again. And this time, once you put the American puppet in Russia, then he will have all his nuclear missiles pointed at China, and China will have no friends. And then we can bring down China, the Communist Party, and then China will be taken over by Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Google and Apple. And then the Westerners will live happily ever after. The American century will last another 100 years. That was the actual dream. That was the
Mm.
whole reason that they used Ukraine to wage a proxy war. But the moment that they stole Russia's foreign exchange, all the countries, and even friends like India, you know, India is very pro-US,
Mhm.
and that's a smart thing the US did as well. You know, they have basically bought all uh, the elites, the media, the think tanks in India. They're all bought and paid for by the US. You know, it's
Is it with
sad.
USAID?
Yeah, it's so sad. But but even the Indian businessmen they started to speak out against the US. And then they, and that's when the Indian foreign minister, he really started to talk about a multipolar world, and how we need to move away from the dollar. And then BRICS became very popular. A lot of the countries wanted to join BRICS. And now we have like 30, 35 new countries who want to join BRICS, because so now there's a positive vision of how the world could be. We don't need a boss. We're all on the same level. So Russian, Chinese, Nigerian, Kenyan, Indian, Filipinos, Brazilian, we're all the same. And we're going to work together as partners. So that's a good idea. And so, the Ukraine war was a huge mistake. And now you can see the US is backtracking so
Trying to get out
rapidly.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to get
But
out.
yeah, so like this is the advantage of the US is that the fact is there's only like one empire. Okay, so the people who run America are like one a small group of people that we never get to see. So these are like, I mean, international financial people, like the bankers, the big the corporations like BlackRock, right? So they control trillions and trillions of dollars of stocks and corporations. And you have the central banks like the Federal Reserve Bank of the U.S., the European Central Bank, Bank of England, Bank of Japan. Like they're all just one big happy family, And so they all have different names, but it's basically one cabal that work together. So,
So,
so I
but I just
talk.
wanted to ask a question. I just wanted to ask a question regarding these banks. How is it that these banks were so, how did they get to control, like they control the world now without any pushback from the nations that matter? How did it happen?
Yeah. Very good question. We probably have to go back to like 17th century, 18th century. And it starts with a family called Rothschilds, who are these bankers from Germany. And the first guy, his name is Mayer Rothschild. He's Jewish, but so he had 5 sons, and he sent his 5 sons to 5 nations, like one, I mean, at England, one to France, one to Italy, one, I mean, to Austria, and he stayed in Germany. And they so like there's some story of how his son in the UK, he knew about the wars. Okay, so the first thing that they would do is to cause wars between the nations. Okay, and they would fund both sides of the countries. So,
Okay.
for example, like they would fund the British Empire, they would fund the French Empire, and they would make them fight. And so they would win whichever party wins. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they came to the U.S. and they tried to kill the U.S. Presidents who did not want the central bank. So the central bank, we can talk for like an hour. It's like a long
On the
story,
bags. Yeah.
Yeah, but once you control the center, the Rothschild, one of the Rothschilds, he said, "I do not care which king sits in the throne, as long as I get to control the money supply." So once you control the banks, You control everything about nation.
Ukraine.
You control all the politicians. You control all the corporations. You control the media. You control entertainment. You control the academics. So yeah, so we are a world run by central bankers, and then all the people are so scared to speak the truth, and so it's really like a huge mafia that runs the world.
More.
uh
Okay, let's
you
come
know
back. Okay, are you done?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so let's come back to the multipolar world. Um, Now we know that, like just like you said, the United States was using Ukraine, hoped to use Ukraine to weaken Russia, right? And then we are seeing what is going on with China, that is with Taiwan, and how they are trying to also use Taiwan to to weaken China. Hopefully that doesn't escalate. So my question now is, now that the multipolar world is already here, because last week I listened to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, and he just said it, that this is a new world, we're in a multipolar world. He also said that Russia is a great power. So they have come to terms with the fact that the world has changed. My question is, how do you think United States will handle this? Because sometimes I feel like they may just decide to just scatter everything, right? Let's just have it one, destroy ourselves. But how do you think the United States is going to handle this?
yeah. So so first of all, the US is not going to roll over and say, okay, multipolar world is here. Okay, and I'll be just one of the poles. No, okay,
Mm,
they're not going to give up the power so easily, right? So, because being the unipolar power, having the ability to print trillions and trillions of dollars, the ability to control the world, the power is very, very addictive. So they're not going to let the multipolar world arise without
fight.
one last fight. you know so as much as I mean, it seems wonderful that the US is making friends with Russia. That's good for the world. And but I think that they're going to try to pull Russia away from BRICS and away from China. Okay. So Putin is very smart. So I hope he doesn't do the same mistake as the Soviet Union leaders did in the 1950s. Because this is exactly what the US did in 1959 when they brought in the Soviet leader to the US, and he traveled for like about 2 weeks, and he fell in love with America. He's like, oh, wonderful America. And then he went, yeah, he was a fool. And he went straight to China. From the US, he flew back to Moscow, and then one day later, he flew to Beijing, and he got into a huge fight with Mao Zedong, and he basically broke off the relations with China. So then China was very mad at the Soviet Union, because then China suffered a lot because of the abrupt break in the relationships, and now China didn't have any big friend. So it was not a friend of the Soviet Union. It was not a friend of the U.S. So China
Mm,
suffered a lot in the 1960s. So then, but guess what the U.S. did? In 1972,
mm,
as Nixon flew to China, he said,
yeah,
actually, we are your friend,
yeah,
and we want you to work with us against the Soviet Union. Okay, so like this is the divide and rule smartness of the U.S. that the rest of the world doesn't have. the rest of the world, for some reason, is so stupid that they keep falling for this, the
Same
divide and
thing.
rule.
Yeah.
Same thing over and over, right? So they support A to bring down B, and then they would go support B to bring down A. So they did this during World War II. So like if you look at 1930s, uh, uh, the U.S. The corporations in Wall Street, they supported the Nazis. So the U.S. corporations like Ford, GM, IBM, they all went to Germany. They worked with Hitler, and they spent a lot of money building the German the infrastructure and the manufacturing and the industries. And then they said, "Oh, we hate the communists." And Wall Street and the American, the oligarchs, they were all friends with the Nazis. Like, George Bush, his grandfather was a big banker who funded the Nazis.
No,
And then,
interesting.
yeah, and then once the World War started, they switched sides, and then they were working with the communists. Okay, how does that work, right? So they do it so smoothly, that you don't even, see that there is something wrong. They switch like so, like without feeling bad, right? So like for the last about decade, they were friends with Ukraine. They funded all the Nazis in Ukraine. They spent billions of dollars arming Ukraine. And now, at a drop of a hat, they switch
So let's
sides,
take a
okay?
picture.
Which is like really amazing, right? It's like it's like a very, very mind-boggling skill. And they're like, no, no, actually, we love Putin. We hate Zelensky. Okay, so for 15 years, the U.S. Demonized Putin as the dictator, and now suddenly, in just 1 month, Zelensky has become the dictator, and Russia is a wonderful nation that America must actually get along with.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very interesting. Now, speaking about that, because Trump was the one who made the statement that Zelensky is a dictator, I just wanted to ask you, what role do you think that the Trump administration plays in the multipolar world? Because based on the decisions he has been making recently.
Yeah. So, uh, so I have two thoughts. I don't know which one is right. Only time will tell. One is that maybe Trump will be like the Gorbachev of the Soviet Union. But Gorbachev, he basically single-handedly brought down the Soviet, the empire, right?
Mm,
So he said, "Oh, okay, all right, communism was bad. We will go with capitalism, glasnost, perestroika," and he brought down the Soviet empire. So maybe Trump will be the Gorbachev of the U.S. because he's slashing the fundings for foreign aid, CIA funding. He's laying off a lot of CIA members. He wants to slash the American military budget by 40% in 5 years. So, so maybe he will bring down the American empire, peacefully. So that's one thought. On the second thought is that he's just being smart, and he's going to try to turn Russia against China. He's going to
oh,
do the reverse
yes.
Nixon.
Listen, because I saw that
Yeah,
somewhere in the newspaper this morning. Okay.
yeah. So I don't
Um,
know which one is true.
Only time will tell, like you said. So in the next, I don't take much of your time. So probably in the next 10 minutes, let's just go through like two or three questions. Now, the big one is China. You said it earlier that this whole multipolar world we're discussing wouldn't be possible without China. So I just wanted to ask, what role do you think that China is going to play in this new world? Do you think it's going to now become the new policeman of the world? What do you think that at the core of the Chinese policy, what do you think it's going to be in this multipolar world?
Yeah, so China is going to be a superpower for sure. And because there's no other country that works so hard and so diligently in so many different areas, you know. So, for example, Russia is, Russia and the Soviet Union were very good in the military, you know, but they were not very good in trade. They were not very good in the consumer goods. They were not so leading in, say, the computer science, semiconductors. They didn't make any good, really, movies and TV shows and things like that, right? But China is succeeding in all areas that you can think of. You know, it succeeds in manufacturing, it succeeds in trade, it succeeds in technology. They're now far ahead of the US in, say, I mean, the electric cars,
Yeah.
solar panels, batteries, and even social media. Like, I mean, TikTok is
Yeah.
so much better than the US. And China is succeeding in the infrastructure. Like, if you watch the videos of Chinese cities and the bullet trains and the robots, wow! Like, like they're like about 20 years ahead of America. So, and they're also very good in with diplomacy, right? So, like, they come to Africa, they don't give the
Lectures.
preachings. Yeah,
Yeah.
like they don't say, how come your gay people are not getting married? No, they, like they don't, poke their nose, right? And they're like, hey, Nigeria, what can we do together? Can we build a bridge, highways, airports, seaports, right? So, like, they're all into business, and it's a win-win business, and they are mostly fair, right? Like,
Mm.
some people, they complain, but like most of the Africans I have spoken to or have listened to, they have positive views of China, what they're
Yeah.
doing in Africa. So that's really good. So China doesn't want to be, China doesn't want to have military bases. It doesn't want to have coups in the African countries. So it doesn't want to assassinate people. That's all the CIA shenanigans, right?
Yeah.
So China is like, buddy, let's do business, and regardless of like, if you have a president from this party or that party, they both want a good airport. They don't, they both want a good seaport. They both want railways, and buy Chinese goods. And so China will be uh, a good superpower, I think. But so no one can be 100% certain about the
That's
future,
it. Yeah.
right? So it's like, you find somebody, you fall in love, you get married, but you don't know if, like, if that guy is going to be a loser in the future
Yes.
or not.
Fine. Yes, that's true. Okay, let's
So
now. Okay, are you done?
yeah.
Okay, let's come to Africa. Our last two questions will be with Africa. What do you think Africa? What role do you think Africa is going to play or can play in the multipolar world?
Yeah, so it's going to be a huge, okay. So it but can be, right? So we all have the potential, right? So just like India, the African nations have a huge, huge potential. We talked about it before. You have wonderful natural resources. You have land. You have a lot of people, 1 billion people, and a lot of young people. So the best time for Africa to take advantage of all these, the confluence of factors is the next about 20 years, right? Because if you don't take advantage of this wonderful set of situations in the next 20 to 30 years, then Africa will find it very, very hard to succeed afterwards, right? Like because then all the people will be old, and
Mm,
but 20 years from now, the people will not be having that many children,
mm.
right? So like right now is your best time, so you have
Okay.
a lot of young people like 16, 17, 18, and you have to put them to work, and you have to build a sound uh, the infrastructure. So if you want to build roads, railways, telecom, dam, power plants, seaports, airports, schools, hospitals. So get it all done within the next
Like,
20
yeah,
years.
yeah. Okay. All right then. So the final question I'll ask you is, now that you have given a really good advice that we should get it done now, because now is the best opportunity. In what ways do you think that Africa can leverage this changing tides to help our military, our economy, and even our political clout on the global level? What do you think that we specific things do you think we can do?
Yeah, so like, I mean, well, you are in a sweet spot, right? Because, well, everybody wants to be friends with Africa, right? The
Yeah, that's
US,
good.
uh, yeah. So, but China needs Africa. The US and the Europeans, they need Africa. So uh, the best thing is to have strategic autonomy, right? So be
Mhm.
friends with the US, be friends with Europe, be friends with Russia, be friends with China, and so let them all fight for the
Our
opportunities,
places.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, if you want to build a dam, so well, you can just say, "Hey, guys, who wants to build a dam?" You know, China, France, Canada, Germany, Saudi Arabia, whoever. So you guys, so let's have a bid, and you build this power dam, power plant. You build these roads, railways, schools, whatever, and in return, you get a sweet deal on this mineral, that mineral, and you can have a seaport. We give you, 70% discount on the Chinese ships, whatever,
Mm,
right? So so it's all about making business deals, and to bring in all these countries, and let them fight for uh, the opportunities in Africa. And then you should also like say, hey, we want to send 1,000 Nigerians to the engineering school in the US, but they're all going to come back to Nigeria once they finish, studying. So it's about, like really making smart deals, and then you can make it happen.
right. Thank you so much, Mr. SL Kaplan. This has been a real eye opener for me. I used to think that I had an understanding of the whole geopolitics and multipolar world, but you have even enlightened me the most. Thank you so much. And I hope that we can do this another time.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Amanda.
All right then. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.